The very idea of mu tech in the first place, we tell you, is not to avoid conflict and like cause ostracization, but to create an environment where the victim can actually cope and reintegrate into society later on. Three things I'm going to do in my speech. First, on framing. Second, forwarding our first argument on the principal justification, and third, on the impact of the mental health of the victim. So first, on framing, we say this mute technology is only for that individual. So only that individual who is actually muting like a certain group or like a certain individual in the first place cannot like sense the presence of that individual to that individual. That person just does not exist. And second, it's not like they can mute this person forever. There's obviously a choice where they can like unmute again, and they'll be able to sense the presence again. Thirdly, I think it's very Thirdly, this new technology is we're not going to be using this on like random occasions. We're saying that this will be only subjected to like where the victim is in need of this new technology, where they feel like they're being put in danger, where they need a certain protection and some time away from another individual. We say the stakeholders that we're going to focus on OG here are the victims, and our goal is to help them reintegrate into society and actually get over their traumas. And whoever we say this is the most important like metric of the debate, where we have to help these vulnerable stakeholders and give them autonomy in order to like take control of their lives again, which their like perpetrators took away from them. We say whoever makes this metric wins the debate. First, then, on principal justification. We say on two levels, this new technology is principally justified. First, we think it's very important for these victims to get autonomy. In the first place, because of like whatever the perpetrator has done, the victim does not have autonomy in the case that they're, first of all, constantly being like scared to go outside because of PTSD, because like potential reoffenses. This is very prevalent in the cases of like, for example, sexual assault victims, where it's very like prevalent that these victims have a constant like worriness about other men or like other individuals around them, in which that they're going to assault them. Note that this PTSD like kind of prevents them from actually like going outside in the first place, and by restricting this one individual and a group of people, we prevent this by allowing the safety of that individual, not only allowing the safety of their individual on a practical level where they cannot get hurt. Second, we also do this in a mental level where that certain someone doesn't really necessarily feel scared whenever to do like bare necessities, such as like going to the supermarket or just going outside to see their family. We say this is a right that these people deserve, in which that these people, no matter like how much like trauma they received, they still need to be able to reintegrate into society and actually do what they're meant to. We say these perpetrators have taken away their autonomy by like making them scared, by taking away their like whole integrity and stuff. And because of this, they're restricted to these things. We say it's principally justified for these victims to get like some sort of time away from them, and to ensure their safety for them to do these necessities which give them autonomy at the end. Second, then, on how we improve the mental health of the victims themselves. Note that these victims have gone through like extensive histories of like abuse and bullying throughout their lives. Note that this is like very bad for them in a way where they're not able to like effectively go out, and we get outside government is that we're able to like actually give safety to that individual, where not only they can't get hurt in like a further level of where their safety is like being like their safety is being in danger. We say that this is both in like the mental ability as well, where they can simply just like feel safe within their own house. We say this is a very important metric of today's debate, where this individual can actually feel like they're able to reintegrate back into society and actually achieve their dreams. Without this, we say like we're saying that the like just simple restraining orders cannot do this. The exclusive benefit that we get on our side is we get so much more feasibility that this individual can actually feel safe, in which they can't be in which they can't be like inflicted with a lot of violence. And note that like we also get conflict resolution in our side. As I mentioned to you before, that this individual does not restrict like everyone. It's not like they're gonna mute everyone. So they're still able to get like these people who they can trust. And insofar that is true, we are able to actually solve problems as well in a safe environment, and which we say is the best like solution in which these individuals, these victims, are able to like talk about their problems in a safe place where they're not constantly being threatened, and actually come to a consensus and come to a solution because there's no complete restriction. We tell you that like just a simple restraining order cannot achieve this, because there's still this like constant looming a danger that is upon these individuals, and we give them autonomy to like restrict anyone that that they think is dangerous to them, which is why we give them autonomy. Now, how then we help them rehabilitate? Okay. It is important that these individuals reintegrate into society and to do like and to function and to just do these basic necessity. We say this number one, principally just. Number two, then we say this practically just, because a lot of these victims are already like in a put in like a vulnerable position in the first place. We say like a lot of victims of like these crimes are marginalized people. Insofar that is true, like the if they're like being like upon that also being inflicted like crime and stuff, we say we're like completely boxing them out in a place where they don't feel safe like living anymore. Note that they're going to have like severe mental issues because of like whatever violence they've been inflicted on, because these victims have a life, and because we give them a principally and practically a just solution where they can control their life again and actually do the things that they want in their own standards. We say this is the most important thing in our debate, because we're able to achieve this for all those reasons that we're so proud to propose.
Panel. Today, proposition comes up to us and tries to convince us to strip society of its moral values and dehumanize the people around us. Their arguments are fundamentally based on nothing but selfishness, and today, we as opening opposition will prove to you why this act does nothing but destroy the ethos of any moral ethics society has. Let's start with some rebuttals for Prime Minister's speech. Panel. Prime Minister very, very unfairly narrows the debate to where only victims of crimes can gain access to this technology. Number one, on top of that, we don't really see how government will be able to actually restrict access to this newly found and powerful technology, right? We don't really see how they have any mechanization as to explain how, oh, this new like crazy technology where you can just mute people all of a sudden can only be like restricted to just victims of like major like of trauma, right? So we don't really see how they're going to be able to actually like do this where like they can just narrow the entire debate into just victims of crimes. We don't really see how this works. No matter what the government does, there will always be individuals who will find access to these devices and misuse them. We see that the definitions and the characterization that the OG has set is very, very unfair and narrows the fences of the debate into a very small ground. Now, the entirety of the Prime Minister's case is entirely based around, oh, let's help the victims of crimes. And yes, we also do, as opening opposition, want to help these victims of crimes. However, this regarding everything I've said so far about how, this is a very unfair characterization. There's little to no mechanization as to how this is going to actually happen. Let's take them on their very, very, very best and take down their case as a whole. From the characterization of Prime Minister that said about like these victims, right? It sounds like they're going to have to give this to this technology to victims who have been very, very mentally damaged or have gained like big trauma from like the cases, right? And with all due respect, we believe that this technology should especially not be given to them. These tech individuals that have lost trust with the people around them and also while being mentally unwell, make very, very impulse decisions and mute out people that only want to help her. The lack of physical contact like that will happen when you mute out the people around you will only worsen her mental well-being, right? These people, imagine like already losing trust with the people and making like impulse decisions to just mute everyone around her. She won't be in a room or in a world where like nobody can impact her, nobody can touch her, nobody can like help her out, and she would just like the victim will just continue to like become worse and worse, right? So we don't really see how at all this would the side of Prime Minister would actually work at all. So we don't really so we think that this basically just takes down the entire fundamentals of the entire case. And once again, we believe that the technology that has been implemented in this motion should not be only limited to the victims, because we see that it's very, very possible for it to be used like widespread, right? Which is what I'll be talking about in my speech today. Now, number one, the main thing that we need to talk about, the main moral consideration that we must have is the idea of autonomy and the right to agency, right? Now, central to the ethical discourse is the concept of autonomy, the intrinsic right of individuals to exercise agency over their own lives, right? The capability to unilaterally like just mute another person fundamentally undermines this principle and basically just encroaches upon like the essence of like personal liberty, right? Now, when one person like possesses this power to really silence another, we tread very perilously close to like a dystopian reality where like human dignity is completely compromised. We must ask ourselves, what does it mean for our society when individuals can dictate who is worthy of being seen and heard? In a world that values freedom, such a mechanism not only undermines personal liberty, but also erodes the very fabric of our collective existence. The ability to mute another person is not merely a tool, it is a profound violation of the ethical covenant that binds us together as a society.
Point.
Now, no, thank you. Moving on to another bigger, more pressing issue about this idea, because this ethical concern that I've just brought up is a very basic and fundamental understanding that builds us together as a society, right? Now I'll explain to you more detailedly, with more detail as to why this device will absolutely ruin society as a whole. Now, this is the idea of oppression and tyranny that we brought about with this device. Proposition might think that this device is going to simply just, mute your annoying friend who is talking too loud or talking too long or just annoying as a whole. But in reality, this is a way for humans with zero moral values to reshape society how they want, right? The specter of tyranny looms large when we consider the potential for systematic abuse inherent in this technology. History has shown us that power, when unchecked, leads to oppression, right? The ability to actually just mute another individual in your idealistic world creates a perilous dynamic when those with power can just exploit it to silence the distant, marginalized voices and entrench their own authority.
Point.
No, thank you. What does it look like? This looks like those who have always seen homeless people or beggars being less of a human than they are, and just choosing to just completely mute them and remove them from their idealistic world. What does this look like? This looks like minorities who have been racially marginalized. These looks like communities who have been marginalized, segregated, to be completely wiped away in this person's dream world, right? This is a world, that proposition that is trying to breed, where it's trying to breed, and panel, do not let them get away with this. This is not just a hypothetical scenario. It is a harrowing reality that we must confront. The technology to mute others could facilitate an environment in which the privileged quash the voices of the disenfranchised, the perpetuating like cycles of inequality and injustice. We must remember that freedom is not a privilege for like a select few. It is a fundamental human right that should be safeguarded for all. By allowing individuals to mute one another, we risk creating a society where oppression masquerades up as empowerment, right? And where these very ideals of liberty and justice for all are rendered basically hollow. Now, what does this look like for the people who are being muted? Let's delve into the impacts, the psychological impacts and trauma that these people who are being muted will therefore get. Because as we've seen so far from opening government's case, they've only really focused on the user itself. They've only focused on, how the user thinks, how the user feels, and narrowed it down to just victims, right? We see that there's going to be very dire concerns and impacts on the people who are being muted. So how would this actually impact, right? The psychological implications of being muted are profoundly troubling, right? Leading to like a lot of that can lead to emotional trauma that is both insidious and pervasive, right? To be rendered completely unseen, unheard, unfelt is to be stripped of one's humanity as a whole, right? A denial of recognition as a valid participant in humanity is completely ridiculous. It is dehumanizing. The dehumanization breeds profound psychological distress, anxiety, depression, and whatever not, right? And we see that these impacts will be far more concerning than whatever like impacts that the government just tries to focus on for the user itself, because we see that is not simply the case, right? Your selfish actions does not like it's not just you that's being affected, it's everybody around you. It's everybody that's now feeling like, oh my god, my friend that I like really enjoy talking to has just suddenly muted me, has just completely like ignored me and like removed me from their existence. And yes, you can say that, oh, it's temporary, you can unmute at any time. But do you not think that these effects would like slowly build up? So panel, we as opening opposition will not stand for this injustice, because it's not just an innocent little device, it's an evil machinery that can completely reshape society. And we as side opening opposition do not want to let that happen. Thank you very much. So proud to oppose.
We strive to live in a world that protects the most vulnerable stakeholders of this debate. So proud to propose, right? So let me start off with some refutations to OO, right? OO tries to come up here and talk about how this inherently should not be given to victims because they're impulsive and they'll start muting everyone, right? We tell you that number one, the main the argument that our prime minister brought up to this debate is that they would mute the perpetrator, right? We already told you there's going to be some kind of checks and balance system to make sure that they're not just inherently muting everybody in society. And we tell you that even if they are victims, they're not completely irrational, right? On both sides of the world, they will try to isolate themselves from to an extent, but we tell you it's very unlikely that these victims will just go ahead and start muting everybody in their society, right? Because to an extent, they are still rational. They still understand that they need help, right? Okay. And then they try to talk about autonomy and about how people are going to be deciding who's worth listening to. Again, we tell you there's a checks and balance system, and it's not just going to look like people being racist and inherently muting everyone who's a minority. We also tell you that the main people who will have access to this device, the main people who have incentive to use this device are people who are minorities, because they can block out the people who hate on them, the people who bring up physical or emotional violence upon them, right? So we tell you this is inherently not true. And then they try to talk about how this is going to harm the marginalized, and they try to bring up the example of the homeless and stuff. Again, we want to tell you that there's going to be a strong checks and balance system where you cannot just go ahead and mute everyone. And we tell you that, and my third argument is just going to completely flip this on them. And their last point was about dehumanization and about how these individuals are going to be ignored by others and how these individuals are going to be selfish. We tell you that people who are using these devices are not inherently selfish because they have some reason to do so. Yet, and they're most likely victims of actions that the person they are muting has already done, right? It's not like, are you just gonna go and mute your best friend for no reason? Like they try to frame. We tell you that this is mostly gonna look like when you're getting bullied, or if there's someone who's inherently mean to you. These are situations where they would use this in, right? And we tell you that if they try to bring up this example about how this is gonna hurt the other person involved, we tell you that like muting or blocking is already available on platforms such as social media, which has the exact same feeling, right? So we tell you this isn't really true. And again, we tell you these individuals are not completely irrational, stupid, and has no emotional sense, right? We tell you that they're irrational to an extent where they're not just gonna ruin all their friendships by going and muting everyone for no reason. And because people understand, right? And before I move on to my third argument, I'll take up here why.
So you keep on mentioning these checks and balances, but how come in these two speeches I haven't heard any like real actual mechanization as to what these checks and balances actually look like in order to stop marginalization?
Okay, we tell you that checks and balances will look like, number one, government officials overlooking the system, and then it's not just going to be like, oh, everyone can just mute everyone for no reason. Again, as our PM already told you, there's going to be some kind of overlooking, and we also tell you there's going to be a natural checks and balance system put in by society, because obviously if you just start muting everyone, people are going to think people are not like, people are not going to be like, okay, there's going to be this a societal narrative that you just mute people that you do not like, that harm you, right? It's not going to be, we think it's very unlikely that society itself is just going to accept everyone muting everyone. We think it's more going to be like a checks and balance system, a natural checks and balance system, number one, where people in society stop each other from just muting everyone because they still have some inherent like reason to want to be social. And we also tell you there's going to be government overlooking, right? And if opposition tries to come up here and talk about how people are going to be muting everyone, we think that number one, that's a very, very small minority of cases. And number two, even if we buy that there are going to be cases like that, we tell you that people who are muting everyone are inherently on their side still going to be isolating themselves from society, right? Because these are inherently people from the get-go didn't want to be part of society. We're isolated, we're introverted, and had no like real reason to go integrate in society. So we tell you that anyone who is just muting everyone on our side of the house are still going to be isolated on their side of the house. So there's no inherent, there's no exclusive harm brought upon us by this, right? Okay, so moving on to our third argument about how this is going to actually benefit the minorities and the marginalized, right? Okay, so what is the inherent benefit that we're providing to you? We're providing to you an inherent benefit that's going to help the most vulnerable stakeholders of this debate, which are minorities, right? Because these minorities will not be exposed to hate and violence, right? Let's do some character analysis here, right? So minorities are often hated on, they're marginalized. This can look in forms like racism, sexism, like being homophobic, or other forms like that, right? We tell you that this can and the hate going towards them can range from just like slurs to actual physical violence, where people are showing up to their houses, throwing eggs at their windows and stuff like that, right? And we tell you that hate on all levels, whether it's just verbal or physical, harms the minorities, right? And this affects the minorities in many ways. We tell you that because they're being hated on for something they cannot control, this makes them self-doubt themselves as an individual, which gives them identity crises and makes them inherently stop liking themselves, right? Because they think, okay, what's wrong with me? Why do all these people hate me, right? And we tell you that that's inherently why this hate towards minorities is so bad. And we tell you this hate towards minorities also leads to oppression of minorities, because there's so much hate towards these minorities. It's very hard for them to have confidence to go speak up, to be a real part of society, right? And we tell you that the impact of this is that these individuals in minorities are going to have declining mental health, loss of confidence, and they really cannot function at full capacity in society like anyone who is not a minority can, because they have all this trauma and they have all this fear of all these people coming at them, right? But once you can mute these individuals, once these minorities have access to just like stop listening to them, stop acknowledging their existence, it is so much better for the minorities, right? Because they can avoid this conflict, they can avoid this hate, they can avoid feeling all this self-consciousness by just muting people. And we think that as an inherent benefit, because now minorities can live without the fear of being hated on by everyone they see, right? We tell you that this is an inherent benefit for the minorities, but also an inherent benefit for society itself, because now these people who are hating on minorities cannot hate on minorities as much, right? They have less incentive to go up to random people and start hating on them for their looks or their like for their race, their sex, or something like that, because they know that they can get muted, right? So we tell you it's better for society and better for the minorities in general, right? And to add on to what my prime minister was talking about for like for victims, we tell you this looks like cases like sexual assault victims, right? People who are victims of violent crimes suffer from like a lot of PTSD. That's an inherent fact. And they live life in fear of perpetrators coming back and harming them again. But once this muting feature is available, we tell you that once you can meet someone, there is no fear, right? And this is completely different from something like a restraining order, if opposition tries to bring that up, because number one, a restraining order is limited, right? Like it's not gonna, like even if you have a restraining order, it's very likely that the perpetrator can come back and get you anyway, because there isn't some kind of physical thing from stopping you, right? And we tell you that, but once you can meet someone, these victims will feel so much more peace within themselves, which is going to allow so much more healing, and it's going to allow so much of a better transition of them into society, because they don't have this irrational fear that this perpetrator is going to come back and get them, right? Because they know that they're muted, right? So the impact of this is that it's inherently better than the status quo, because it keeps people from feeling irrational and large amounts of fear, right? Especially victims who are already vulnerable to society's worst, right? And we still tell you that this is going to lead to better integration within society, right? And we tell you that we beat OO so far in 3 main metrics. Number one, in vulnerability, because we protect the most vulnerable stakeholders of this debate. We tell you we also beat them in skill, because we help society as a whole. And we tell you that we also have provided a better social narrative for society in general. And for those reasons, I've never been prouder to propose. Thank you.
I don't think any conversation will go well if I can just shut you out the moment I disagree with you and can't have my way. All right. Now, before I go into my just main argument, I'm gonna give out a few rebuttals on the team government side. Now, their whole case focuses on these trauma victims and how they will help them with this technology, but they're not looking at the bigger picture. Such powerful technology like this is going to be misused as long as you release it to society, whether you like it or not. The problem is the misusing of this tech can lead to harm not just to people personally, but the entire societal structure that allows people to integrate with each other in the first place. They also mentioned that there will be hundreds of checks and balances mentioned multiple times throughout two speeches without any clear elaboration as to what these checks and balances look like. Absolutely zero explanation as to what they are. They just keep repeating it over and over. And the response to my first speaker's POI is that there will be overlooking from the government. Well, guess what? In society, government still overlooks like drugs, right? And yet people still manage to get their hands on drugs and do them, right? Government overlooks social media well-being, but people still kill themselves over cyberbullying. How is OG gonna fix this? Not sure they will ever. All right, and sure, it sucks to be hated on. It sucks to hear racial slurs. But what you're trying to do by giving people this technology is just to block things out, like how you block people on the internet, without getting to the root problem as a society. You're not fixing racism. You're escaping from it. It's still gonna be an issue that plagues society, even if you have this tech and implement it like Gov does, right? And through two speakers, government only gave us a flawed escape to a deeper issue and ignoring a bigger picture to appeal to a smaller demographic. And we're here to tell you why we're gonna do better. All right. No, thank you. Moving on to my argument that this is a technology that can be abused, and it is because it can be abused, it causes societal divide. Two layers of analysis. Firstly, there is a lack of fair social discourse. People are obviously going to disagree, and that's mutual on both sides of the house. People on their side of the house, however, are going to use this technology to their advantage, because instead of hearing out the perspective of another person, in a world where one can just mute people, you are limiting the perspectives of a person's worldview. You are allowing divide to happen amongst people. No, thank you. Imagine in the US with liberals and Democrats running around. If a Democrat was able to mute a liberal on his ideas and not listen at all and go on living his life without giving a single care to what a liberal have to say, this is going to create a further divide in the political system in the American society, instead of actually integrating these people and allowing like constructive social discourse. This is going to cause less people to be heard on their perspective and hence less willing to share. And society is just going to look like clusters of people with the same idea refusing to hear out another person's. Now, before I move on, I'll take a POI.
If in
Point.
your logic, sorry, POI.
Yep.
If in your logic this technology is so powerful, don't you think the government will not allow everyone to have access to this?
Yeah, but that's the thing. You're not getting to the point. The government can just not allow people to have this, but people are still gonna get it anyways. As I mentioned, the government, even in Singapore, the government doesn't allow drugs. Like, they even put a death penalty on the distribution of drugs, and there's still drug addicts running around the streets. There's almost nothing the government can do to totally abolish this technology getting on the wrong people's hands. All right. Now, moving on to my second layer of analysis, that it sours personal and intimate relationships. Within friendships, families, marriages, oftentimes one of, if not the most important thing to keep that bond and connection alive is communication. It is a reality, whether you like it or not, that people are going to be different no matter how similar two may seem. Ultimately, they're going to be different, right? This means that in between relationships, there are going to be conflicting feelings, ideas, emotions, and ultimately it's going to lead to discourse. It's going to lead to like discussions and arguments, right? Instead of hearing out each other on their feelings and perspectives, you're basically turning the cold shoulder, and mute tech only reinforces the appearance that you don't actually care about what they have to say. And this is just going to sour personal relationships among people. But why, moving on to my impacting, why is this divide significant? I mean, just look at all the other times in history when divide has happened. Okay, let's just take it to the extreme and say we look at diplomatics and politics, right? Look at the Cold War, capitalism against communism. This is two conflicting ideals without finding a common ground, going at each other in this long like arms race, Cold War kind of thing. And look at segregation. The very idea that white people are higher in society than black people has not ended up well, right? So this entire idea of just separation as a whole instead of integration within society has never ended well in history. Nowhere in history has proven to us that divide in society is going to end up well. Those who have power to cause harm to others with a different idea or with a different ideal or with a different perspective is going to do so because it is inherent, whether you like it or not, for humans to want to have things our own way. Now, how does our side of the house address this issue? In our world, you are still entitled to your rights. You're still entitled to your own morals, your worldview, your perspective, but you are at least exposed to the differences of perspectives in the world. You're not trapped into your own little bubble of things that go your way. And you actually have to accept that the world is different, that people are going to disagree, and that it is more likely to lead you to understand and empathize with people despite differing views. Whereas on government side of the house, sure, some are going to be honest, some are going to find help in this technology, some are going to use it honestly, but a large amount of people are still going to use the technology as it is, which is to shut out people they don't want to hear. That's simple as that, as straightforward as that is. People are less likely to be empathetic and understanding towards different perspectives because of prolonged exposure, even if it is not forever, as government said, to their own little bubble world of their own ideals. As my first speaker has already told you, as long as the technology exists, people are going to get their hands on it. A black market is probably going to exist for powerful and in-demand tech like that. And sure, a black market can be mutual on both sides because a black market is always going to exist, but it's going to do more harm on their side of the house with the existence of this technology on that market. And even if they do help trauma victims, they are prioritizing this small demographic of people who can probably find help in other ways over the entire structure of society. And I say that we will much rather have a stable and integrated society than risk everything to help a few victims. And with all that, we're proud to oppose.
I think the issue with the top half of this debate is that after 4 speakers, they end up in a type of deadlock. The fact is that OG just says, well, there's a few good circumstances in which people use this technology. OO follows up with, well, there's also pretty bad circumstances as well. And it kind of just ends there. Like, both of these circumstances are fully possible, and they kind of just sit there in symmetry. What CG is going to do is we're going to explain why people are the best suited to make that decision between whether they use that technology or not, and therefore will tend towards the majority of good cases as opposed to tending towards the self-destructive cycles that OO talks about. Firstly then, we'll prove that mute would be extremely positively developed. And the reason why we're adding this as an extension is that this knocks out any stupid arguments about, oh, it might malfunction, oh, like it might be implanted badly, there might be damage, stuff like that OO has said. I think 3 reasons why it'd be positively developed. 1, I think there's a lot of government incentives. Presumably, people are extremely worried that this is a technology that can go wrong, and that's why there will be things like clinical tests and all of that kind of stuff just to make sure it runs smoothly before it's made available. Secondly, I think there's going to be a lot of protections from that by the companies that make it. That's to say that they can't be tampered with by things like cybersecurity. There's probably going to be lots of spending. There's a lot of public interest there. But thirdly, we point out that there's a lot of social norms around the use of this. So even if you don't believe that it's set in stone that this stuff would occur, it's likely that people develop a way to do this kind of stuff pretty well. Next then, why are people able to use this technology in the right circumstances? The thesis of this argument is that individuals are the ones with direct access to their experiences, and thus they're able to personalize the operation of mute to help them the most. And notably, as I highlighted in my introduction, this cuts through the top half claim, the top half clash, right? Which is that there's some scenarios that are good, there's some scenarios that are bad. We prove that people can pick and choose between which scenarios they use this mute technology in. We fulfill the mechanistic burden for OG to firstly claim their benefits, but also will expand on the broader set of benefits we can also claim. Why are you able to use this well? 4 reasons. The first is that people live their life. They live in their body. They go through their experiences. They know what hurts them. They know what they need, and they're able to make decisions accordingly. But secondly, we point out that they're likely to consider the implications of the use of this technology, that they know that muting someone else might be an important decision for them. And they know that if it's a conversation, then the best way to make sure that conversation finishes well is not to shut someone out. It's to fully interact with them in a way that allows for all views to be heard. That's exactly why you should trust people to make decisions about their own lives and about their own relationships. But thirdly, we point out that this is something that is fully reversible. That's to say, if people are misinformed, then they can simply turn the clock back. They can harm. So the harm is very, very small, but the potential benefit is pretty large. But fourthly, we point out that even if this kind of stuff is harmful, that really doesn't matter, right? Because these people consented to it, because at least we grant these people the ability to feel in control of their actions at the point at which they engage in this kind of technology. That is, in of itself, incredibly fulfilling. What does OO say? They say, well, the person you muted might be hurt. For example, a friend. Firstly, we point out that you probably don't mute your friends. But secondly, we point out that even if you do mute your friends, you probably have a pretty good reason to, right? Because as we explained, sometimes it will be something like, sometimes it's pretty good just to get a bit of alone time to allow people to cool off. That's probably a good thing. But finally, weigh their argument against ours on vulnerability. Who is more vulnerable? The person who is driven to mute someone, or the person who gets muted, probably did something bad in the first place? Clearly, that calculus turns out in favor of us. But finally, we'd also point out that as an extension on the impacts of this entire mechanism, that we'd point out that this is useful for a variety of day-to-day uses. Notably, OG only talks about the most extreme cases, which is when you've been the victim of a crime or you've been the victim of sexual assault. We explained that the average person can use this, and that's why you should weigh it on scale. For example, many people feel overwhelmed in their day-to-day. They feel overwhelmed by the worries that come bubbling up. They feel overwhelmed by the stresses which they have to deal with. And for those people, I think it's incredibly good for them to be able to mute the outside world, for them to have a personal sense of safety and security in a world by themselves where they're able to relax. For example, if you're grieving, it's important that you can mute other people. It's important that you can go by yourself into a room and you can go through your emotions. You can go through how you feel. And that is ultimately something which is incredibly important for those groups of people, which is incredibly cathartic. In the same way that people might mute other people in online games for being racist, for being stressful, or just overwhelmed, we think they can do the exact same thing within their daily lives. That is a far, far broader set of circumstances than OG talks about. This is everyday applications, which explains why not only do we fill in their mechanistic burden, we also weigh over them for the second or third time. I'll take a POI, if there is one from opening. No? Okay, let's move on. The final extension that we're going to bring to you in this speech is just to prove that principally, the extension of more options of choice will always be a principally good thing. Firstly, people don't choose their experiences. People live under the tyranny of birth. They live under the tyranny of geography. They live under the control of social norms and interactions, which they never chose in the first place. These were things that they were born into. These were not things that they chose. The principle, therefore, in this debate ought be giving people more options for how they want to live their lives, because we acknowledge that people are different, that people react differently, they laugh differently, they love differently in extremely, extremely different ways. These are things that are highly individualistic. That's why it's good that people have more ways to live, to fundamentally exist. It's good that people have more options for how to deal with the stresses that life ultimately throws at you, because those things are all things that all of these people can use individually to have a better experience, that they can adapt to their own conception of what it is like to live in a quickly changing world. That is the principle of choice in this debate. Don't let OO gaslight you with their kind of weird principle claim. So at the end of this speech, we break the opening half deadlock because we prove people are able to use this in the right circumstances, and we also give you far more impacts, and we also explain why principally the extension of more options will also be a great thing. Let's finally get onto a piece of just going through the rest of the teams, explaining how we come up on top. Let's start with OG. Their claim is that this is an extension of restraining orders and safety, and that's the entire conception that the case is built upon. Two issues. The first is that, as OO points out, this is incredibly narrow. We take a far larger burden because we explain even if everyone has access to this technology, only few will use it in appropriate circumstances where they self-select into that use. But secondly, is that this is all on the premise that you can't interact with the person anymore. Presumably their actions can still influence you. Maybe it's not parallel worlds, I don't know. But maybe you can feel the ramifications of your actions. A generous read of OO. At this point, we explain why you make that decision well. What does OO say? The first thing I just note about their entire case is that they're really, really extreme. They claim that people will just spiral into depression. We explain this is unlikely because people make those calculuses rationally. But secondly, they say that there's a principle of autonomy, ability to control life. I think we clearly flip this. We give people far more options for how they want to live their life. The final thing is that, communities of minorities are wiped out. Again, we point you towards the simple fact this is not a technology that will be used as lightly. This is a technology that will only be used in circumstances where people have thought it through. That's why all of their extreme harms never eventuate. So proud to stand on closing government.
I'd like to thank.
Okay, so two things in my speech. Firstly, I'd like to provide rebuttals to all the other teams, and then finally, I'll move on to the positive material and arguments from our side. Okay, so what we got from OG in the opening exchange is that individuals have the choice to use this technology to cope or to be happy after being victims of problems. And they suggest that there's this check and balance system where governments can overlook this technology. But we question, how will you know that these governments or allies won't use this for their own benefits, to block out people, groups, or perhaps even entire parties with different ideals? As OO mentioned, and which we agree with such a dangerous and powerful technology, it is very likely that it will go out of control and there will be plenty of people who go after it, whether legal or illegal. And we would like to especially emphasize how this is highly likely since everyone has to face problems, disagreements, and hardships in their lives. Now, what do OO say? They emphasize the individual autonomy and how it leads to further oppression, which is bad for the society. But adding to differentiate ourselves from them, we would like to provide an extension that is to introduce social movements into this debate, which will be discussed later. And this has a bigger scale and impact than the several commodities that they mentioned. Okay, now in the opening exchange, people are both sides are essentially arguing about whether individuals should act selfishly and be happy, or if society should suffer the consequence and not be happy. And we think that the intent of creating this technology in the first place is try to suggest ways for people to be happy by letting them mute everyone. But we question whether this truly achieves its purpose, because if you act selfishly and block out all pain, does that truly make people happy? And we argue that it is fundamentally impossible for individuals to truly be happy if they don't suffer pain first, change the structure and the problems which are causing the pain, and try to make changes that optimize their experience, and then feel happy after fixing the issues that they were dealing with before. Secondly, this technology is supposed to give you freedom. So it is created with the intent of giving people personal freedom, to give people the right to decide if you want to cut someone off and block them from your life. But fundamentally, mute is a technology. Since it blocks out other people, it means that it is allowing people to take the easy way out instead of working on issues or people that are bugging them. As a rebuttal to CG argues that that people should be trusted with the freedom to judge whether they should, when and when not they should use this technology, and that individuals would choose these wisely. But we believe that you can't trust people like that, because people have a tendency to go to escape when there's problems that they face, and when there's things that they can't really seem to find a way out of. As an example, a lot of people procrastinate because they have these deadlines or these problems or like these tasks that are due, but they don't want to face them. So so they choose procrastination as an escapism, and we can see this tendency happening a lot in our daily lives, which is why we believe people shouldn't be trusted with these technologies, because they're only going to use it more since they have a tendency towards escapism. And why is that bad? Because it will lead to, one, more social isolation, and two, people trapping themselves in these echo chambers. Secondly, does that actually empower individuals and give them more freedom? No. In the premise, we want to acknowledge that people who want to block out others are usually like this. Those in position of power or in a position where they're privileged, they usually have a lot of resources and tools that would allow them to work through the problem. So they are unlikely to be able to who are going to use these technologies, meaning that this debate is about people who feel powerless in working through the problems in their lives. So they will then use this technology to block out people and give them the illusion of peace. Now, onto the mechanization and impact as to why that is extremely problematic. The structures of this debate, e.g. Being poor, and the externalities, or such as being in a work environment that is competitive, do not change just because you individually decide to mute it. Meaning, when you are not actively working in the structure to change the problem or make things work for yourself, the escapism mindset is only going to further isolate you and make the life scenario difficult for you, and make everything worse. Why does that not empower these individuals when it is meant to be? Because people are then isolating themselves from these meaningful discussions and movements, which will be discussed next, that create change, although the process might be painful. So next, moving on to social movements, we would like to acknowledge that although in the premise social movements exist on both sides, they're only stronger if these social movements are able to gain critical mass when people aren't blocking out everyone who has different ideas from them. And the way that these movements gain critical mass is by mobilizing the people who experience these grievances, and these people can't have it without people we can't have it with people feeling the pain and muting it away immediately if they don't like them, because fundamentally social movements, which are big impacting movements, often arise from a need to address injustices or inequalities, relying on the collective voices of different individuals and diversity to effect change. So when communities face issues such as racial injustice, other environmental concerns, or economic inequality, the success of these movements hinges on the ability to engage in open discussions. As an example, consider the civil rights movement. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. emphasized the importance of dialogue, speech, and understanding different and differing perspectives to build a consensus and foster empathy. If individuals could just mute all of those dialogues that they disagreed with, essential conversations would be stifled, which undermines the unity needed to propel social movements forward. And secondly, what is the impact and mechanization of this? Firstly, mute technology enables individuals to easily avoid exposure to political and social issues. So it only exacerbates the dangers of what happens when they find these different opinions disagreeable or overwhelming. And this selective engagement also significantly reduces the number and diversity of voices in public debates, leading to a homogenized and potentially polarized public opinion. Second, as individuals opt out of hearing these opposing views, the quality and breadth of these public discourses also decline. So robust debate, which is a cornerstone of democratic societies, which relies on the confrontation of different ideas to forge effective policies and societal norms, are now completely broken down. Can I have an idea of how much time I have left?
20 seconds.
Okay. In conclusion, because this technology fundamentally cannot provide the happiness and freedom that it is intended to provide, and also because it blocks out social movements, it weakens it, and it destroys the entire purpose of it, we on our side, we believe that it must be completely banned and should never be introduced to society in the first place. Thank you.
In the status quo, the average person's response to verbal abuse on the street is to ignore them and walk away, de-escalating the situation. Two things to note. Firstly, I think this is in response to a lot of opposition's like insistence that it's going to be a black market and it's going to be misused and it's going to be a universal technology. I'm just going to tell you it's probably not, because like there's probably going to be like this technology has to be implanted into your brain, and like it's probably going to be distributed by the government. The number of people who would be able to like under the table implant this in people would be minuscule. The reason that Singapore still has drugs is because it's cheap to make overseas. It's smuggled in. Meanwhile, if the government's the only manufacturer and distributor, I think it's just unclear. But secondly, assuming that that's not the case, a vast majority of this speech is going to take opponent at best and deal with the even if this mute is a universal technology, because Gov seem to be losing this battle. So let's try and save them at best. But firstly, let's deal with our principle, because this has gone unresponded to CEO. I'm going to explain why it's debate winning. So why muting should be a right? Because opposition tell you that being muted and not being heard is dehumanizing. But we tell you that you can block. The reason you can block people on social media and you can mute people in video games is because it is your right to engage in that whatever thing you're engaging in, engage in browsing social media, engage in playing the video game without being made uncomfortable. And I think everyone sort of recognizes this. So, and like that means that even if you are in the wrong, even if you are the racist person in the video game, you can still mute everyone else who's turned against you. So then we still think it's in your right to do so, like in this case. So since we allow this smaller extent, I think it would also be reasonable to allow the bigger extent, which is to mute people in real life, because it is your right to do so. It's your right to live a fulfilling life. That means if anything's making you uncomfortable, it's within your ability to try to save yourself. So even if you're a minority and you've been muted, that just means you can't like talk to them. And like that's probably a good thing, because you don't want to talk to them anyway. It's not like they can like refuse you a job or like beat you up. That's like all that's illegal, right? So then I think the worst harms then is just you don't talk to people that like as a minority, is you don't talk to people that muted you. They were probably racist you in the first place. You probably didn't want to talk to them. So then I think this principle is debate winning, because it works on both sides of the house. It explains that everyone principally should have access to technology, meaning if opponents' points land, this principle still stands. But it's not a knife, because we tell you that minorities and victims have more of this right, and that depriving people of a comfortable life is a huge harm that would be immoral to deny. But next, let's go on to the bulk of this debate, which is how this technology is going to be used. I think because OO and CO's entire case is just going to be misused, and you're going to mute everyone. This ruins everyday discussions and relationships and destroys perspective. I think the average person who belongs to a majority group wouldn't really use this mute technology that much, because OO tells like, oh, you'll mute your friend and your girlfriend or whatever, and they'll feel sad. Well, then they're not your friend. If your boyfriend is ignoring you in the status quo, you break up with him. Similarly, if your boyfriend's muted you, you would also break up with him. So then, if your friend's muted you and like you think there's no justified reason for it, then you're probably not going to be friends anymore anyway. So then, this allows people to shape. So I think that's just like unclear analysis on opposition. The next thing it tells is it allows people to shape society how they want, i.e. people can make their own world, be deluded with this great power that they have, and mute all of disenfranchised groups. I think OO have mischaracterized the power of not hearing, because presumably, if you are racist and you antagonize and you engage in antagonizing racist behavior, you want to provoke a response among minority groups and like feel good and feel satisfied from that response. Unclear if you mute the minority group you're antagonizing, that like you would be able to see the reaction and get the satisfaction from it. So then at best, like you get no satisfaction from engaging in racist behavior. You probably wouldn't do it anyway. Or you just don't mute them and you keep doing that racist behavior and the minority mutes you. So then I think like no harms. But still then, why would average people, I'm going to explain why average people would just not mute all social movements or minorities and mute everyone that they don't agree with. Because OO thinks that the average white, because OO thinks, and CO thinks this as well, that the average white man goes, haha, I'm white, I'm going to mute every black man that I see on the street. OO act like the average person sees a black man, empathizes with them, takes their perspective in. They also assume that every black man goes on the streets and screams their perspective. If you really were racist and you didn't want to listen to social movements, protests, or messages, you'd be ignoring them anyway. Like the vast majority of social movements exist online. Like if you really hated them that much, you mute them and you block them anyway. In the status quo, if you see them on the streets, you probably won't listen. You tuned out to their like thoughts anyway. You might scream a few slurs at them and walk away. Like that's like no harms. It doesn't matter if you use the technology or not. You'd still engage that behavior anyway. The next thing they tell us is that people would abuse this as an escape, and it's escape for people who don't want to share the perspective. They want to like de-integrate from society, and like they want to keep thinking that they're right, so they'll mute everyone that thinks that they're wrong. If you really are scared of social interaction, you think that's your right to do so? Like if you're an introvert, that's great. Like these are the types of people in the status quo who move to the country or just like don't engage in talking to other people. Like I think it's even more immoral to force people to talk to other people and like listen to other people when you want alone time. Like maybe you're grieving, maybe you're just scared of genuinely talking to other people. Like it's even more immoral to force perspective. perspectives on someone, it's your choice. So in the status quo, these people who like new to the country, they're a bit introverted. So it's unclear what the difference in difference in scale of like losing their perspectives is. But more than that, they tell us that people will just mute dialogue that they don't agree with, and this completely ruins social movements. I think it's completely stupid because you can't really just mute everyone. Like you're not gonna mute every black man you see on the street because you assume they're a part of a social movement that you disagree with. If you really did disagree with the social movement anyway, then like yeah, you just like mute them anyway. But like the average person who doesn't have a problem with these social movements and sitting on the fence, like they're not gonna like they're not gonna actively go through the trouble of muting every person from a minority group they see because they think that they might have like a racist dialogue. And like even if they hear something they disagree with and instantly mute it, they'll probably be like not listening to the status quo anyway. We'd rather give people the principle to choice. We'd rather give them the ability to tune out to all that racist stuff. Because the example I gave you at the start of my speech, the response to racism on the street is to walk away, ignore it, and de-escalate the situation. The problem with that is you still hear some of the racist rhetoric, and that hurts your ego. Now you hear one word, you mute it, and you walk away. That mitigates all that harm. You leave that the choice that's essential. Therefore, I tell you this technology will be used well. I think my member tells you down the bench to also be used well. I think people would feel an urge. I think people would only people who feel an urge to use it would use it. Just because you internally think someone is lower than you, that's fine. It's your right to think what you want. But on either side, I don't think anyone's going to change these guys are going to change their internal thoughts. Like if their internal thoughts were like hard struck on being racist, they probably wouldn't change that. Therefore, I tell you this will be a valuable defense for vulnerable stakeholders. I also tell you that the types of people who use this are not like obviously, if you're screaming out like a person, if you're a racist perpetrator screaming at someone across the street, or a sexist perpetrator, like you're not going to be screaming at a strong buff like man, even if he's African American. You're targeting weak people. You're targeting children. You're targeting women. Targeting people who are alone. Targeting people who are poor. These are the types of people who are being targeted. It's a valuable weapon to mute them out if they really were going to escalate the situation into violence. There's another threshold to jump with much more risk, much more dangers of punishment. For these reasons, proud to gov.
So I'll talk in this speech about why we weigh over each team, including OG, OO, and CG. And then I'll talk about a comparative as to why on our world, there are exclusive benefits in only ops world. All right, so first on OG, they talk about how this is not for avoiding conflicts, but for letting them cope, and they will only use this for victims of abuse. However, and OO actually does rebut this, but they only touch on a small part, and we would like to expand on why this doesn't empower these abuse victims because you isolate for yourself from the pain. Because first, it's at best a wash for OG because mental health support exists on both sides, and on their side, you aren't actually getting the proper help you need. You're just hiding from your problems. You're simply blocking things that make you react to the trauma, but not working with a professional through the trauma. And if anything, that means you cannot function meaningfully in society because you have constantly mute triggers that bring back the traumatic experience and not seeking professional help because now you have the mute button. And they also talk about how there are minority stakeholders and why they can use this to ignore, I guess, the majority. However, why can't this be flipped? Why can't the majority actually suppress the minority once again in the social movements example that they use to actually gain change? So this social movements would be suppressed and there wouldn't be any actual political or social change. So this does not benefit the minorities. So this is why we weigh over OG. Now, next in OO, they talked about how the OG characterization is narrow because of only victims of crime. So yes, we have already expanded on their rebuttal, and that's something that we have improved on. They also talk about how autonomy and there's the ability for those in power to suppress those marginalized. We also expound on this with the bigger impact on a bigger scale of social movements. And they use the examples of like friends muting each other, which we don't think is really relevant because that's not the scale of which it's going to be used. And we will also give a step-by-step on how positive change only happens on op, which is a unique extension. Because first, there would be the establishment of the role of awareness in social change, because the premise of this is awareness is the first step towards change, because people must recognize and understand a problem before they can be motivated to solve it. And the mechanism is by hearing, seeing, and discussing social, political, and environmental issues, these individuals become more informed about the complexities and urgencies of these issues. Step 2 is
Okay.
highlighting the importance of point later. Step 2 is highlighting the importance of discomfort in motivating action, because discomfort is a powerful motivator for action. And when people are comfortable, they're less likely to seek change. Third, arguing the need for collective dialogue and confrontation, because collective dialogue, including confrontation with opposing views, is crucial for holistic understanding and consensus building. And the mechanism of this is that engaging with a range of perspectives, especially those that challenge one's views, leads to more discussions and solutions that consider multiple angles. And fourth, we discuss the role of empathy, because empathy for different social groups is crucial for inclusive policies and social harmony. And empathy that arises from understanding from others' experiences is, even when they're unpleasant, is actually what leads to change. All right, I'll take the POI.
Yeah, given that the average person is probably not like really racist or like anti whatever, why would they go through the trouble of muting every minority they see?
Okay, I'm going to talk about this in my rebuttals to you guys. So in their point about how they think the average person is not going to use this, we're only actually talking about the specific rich, powerful, and corrupt people who might actually think to suppress them. So when these people are actually facing these social movements, and when they think that they're facing a threat from these social movements, they are the ones who can actually suppress their social movements, and they can block out everything. We're not talking about the average person on the street blocking out social movements. We're talking about the powerful people who are actually going to be affected by these social movements that can actually block out
Point.
these point later. Actually, no more points. So next, I'll talk about why we weigh over CG. They basically say that these people should be able to pick and choose what they want, and that we should trust the people, and that harms don't matter if it makes them feel like they are in control. So this is basically like drugs, because drugs make people feel like they're in control, and this is also an escape from the world, like this mute technology is going to be. So are they saying drugs are fine as well? And if the harms of drugs don't matter as well, if they feel in control? And they also talk about how they never chose their circumstances, and so there are more options about how they live differently. But this can still happen on our side because there's a lot of options already. And people who want to, they talk about how people who would want to use this in their world would most likely use it rationally. But their entire case is based on a really rosy and fantasy world where they think people would definitely think rationally and think through it before using it, which this doesn't have. This doesn't happen at all. Of course not. There's no guarantee that they will definitely think this through. You can't just generalize the type of person who's going to use this. This is similar to OG's point where they just say, we're just going to get these abuse victims to use it. But then here, they're just saying, oh, we're just going to get the rational people to use them. There's also an insistence in black market where they think they're rebutting us, but we never talked about black market. That's only OO, so their rebuttals are ineffective against us. And they finally talk about how they talk about an example of where video games you can mute people in video games, but so you should be able to do that on a bigger scale. However, this is not the same because we are talking about society as a whole. And if you accept muting as a legitimate response in real life, we risk normalizing avoidance as a primary strategy for dealing with this conflict and discomfort. And this could lead to a societal trend where individuals feel entitled to mute anyone who challenges them. And we once again say that there's no restriction against muting everyone. Fair enough. The average person wouldn't go, I guess, through the hassle of muting everyone, but these powerful people would actually mute everyone because there's no constriction, like there's no restriction where you can't mute everyone. They never talk about that. Okay, now on the comparative of why the mute method would only benefit the elites and make it worse for the marginalized. So the comparative is we get enhanced awareness and education because first there's exposure to diverse opinions and experiences, and this educates individuals about communities. And civil rights movements, example, have historically relied on raising awareness through injustices, through direct communication or uncomfortable confrontations. And additionally, there's also examples of like environmental challenges such as climate change, which demand global awareness and cooperation, which are impeded if segments of the cooperation mute discussions of its impacts. And this also strengthens democracy because democracy thrives on the active participation and engagement of its citizens, and the ability to mute opposing views can weaken democratic processes by reducing participation. And additionally, one other thing that we weigh over OO is that they have to highlight how we can only get these benefits on our side and op side, which they don't. Otherwise, their opening exchange is basically that just proposition is bad, and you don't see the comparative, which is why we weigh over everyone here, and which is why we win. Thank you.